The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day Emmeline Voss learned she no longer owned anything at all. She had been standing in the solicitor's office on Granger Street with her gloves still on, because the room was cold and Mr. Bassett had not offered to take them, and she understood from that small neglect that he already knew what he was about to say and did not expect her to stay long. He placed the document on the desk between them. He did not slide it toward her. He simply set it down and looked at the window, as though what was written there had nothing to do with him. Her uncle had filed the claim 3 weeks after her father's funeral. The estate, Dunhollow, 400 acres in the Northumberland hills, the stone house with the eastern wing that always leaked in March, the tenant farms, the woodland, the small library her mother had spent 20 years collecting, had been placed in legal dispute on the grounds that her father had signed a private deed of transfer 8 months before he died. Mr. Bassett explained this in the same voice he might use to read out a weather report. The deed was dated. It was witnessed. It was, he said carefully, valid. Emmeline asked to see it. He showed her a copy. Her father's signature was at the bottom, in the slightly cramped hand he used when his gout was troubling him. Her uncle's name, Thaddeus Voss, was printed in a clean clerk's script above a second signature she did not recognize. "Who witnessed it?" she asked. "A Mr. Hartwick, a solicitor from Alnwick. My father never mentioned a Mr. Hartwick." "No," said Mr. Bassett. She looked at the signature again. The date was the 14th of October. She had been at Dunhollow that week. Her father had been ill, a fever that came and went for most of that autumn, and she had sat with him in the evenings and read to him from the books he could no longer hold himself, and not once in any of those evenings had he said a word about a deed or a transfer or a solicitor from Alnwick. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. Mr. Bassett folded his hands. "You could contest it. How long would that take?" "Years," he said, "and the costs would be considerable." She thought of the money she had, her mother's jewelry which she had sold 2 pieces of already to cover the funeral expenses, a small account her father had kept in her name, which amounted to something under £90. She thought of Thaddeus, her father's younger brother, who had visited Dunhollow perhaps 4 times in her entire life, and on each occasion had walked the grounds, with his hands behind his back, and his eyes moving over everything, in a way that had always made her feel like a stranger in her own home. She picked up her gloves from the desk. She did not remember having taken them off. "Thank you," she said, because there was nothing else to say, and she walked out into the cold. She took a room in a boarding house in Newcastle for 6 weeks. It was a narrow room on the 2nd floor, with a window that faced a brick wall and a landlady named Mrs. Orton, who brought tea at 7 and expected silence after 9. Emmeline spent those weeks writing letters to her father's old friends, to a cousin in Edinburgh who did not write back, to anyone she could think of who might know something about the deed or about Thaddeus or about a solicitor named Hartwick from Alnwick. Most of the letters were not answered. The ones that were answered said, in various careful ways, that there was nothing to be done. She was 23 years old, and she had £84, a trunk of clothes, and a house she could not enter. It was Mrs. Orton, oddly enough, who gave her the idea. Mrs. Orton had a niece who worked as a lady's maid in a house in Northumberland. A grand house, she said, though she could not remember the name of it. And the niece had written to say there was a position open for a housemaid because one of the girls had left suddenly to get married. Mrs. Orton mentioned this at breakfast one morning without any particular intention, the way people mention things they expect to be ignored. Emmeline set down her teacup. "Which house?" she asked. "Calder Hall," said Mrs. Orton. "Lord knows where that is. Some estate north of Hexham." Emmeline knew exactly where Calder Hall was. It was 11 miles from Dunhollow. She had never met the Duke of Calder. She knew of him the way one knows of weather in a place one has never visited, in general terms, through other people's accounts, without any real sense of what it meant to stand in it. He had inherited the title at 26 when his father died, which had been 5 years ago. He was said to be severe and not much given to society. His estate was one of the largest private landholdings in the north of England. He had lawyers, good ones, and he was known in the careful language people used about powerful men to be someone who got what he wanted. She wrote to Calder Hall that afternoon and gave her name as Emmeline Marsh. She did not allow herself to think too carefully about what she was doing. If she had thought carefully about it, she would have understood that it was a desperate thing, the kind of thing a person does when they have run out of other options. And she already knew that without having it confirmed. She told herself she only wanted to be close to Dunhollow. She told herself she only wanted to understand what Thaddeus intended to do with the place, whether he meant it to live there or sell it or simply hold it, and that being at Calder Hall would put her in a position to find out, because estates 11 miles apart in Northumberland shared the same solicitors, the same suppliers, the same gossip. She told herself she was not going there to ask the Duke of Calder for help. She was not entirely honest with herself. She was hired without difficulty. The housekeeper at Calder Hall was a tall woman named Mrs. Sedgwick, who interviewed her in a small room off the kitchen and asked her 3 questions: whether she had references, whether she was in good health, and whether she had any objection to early mornings, and seemed satisfied by the answers. Emmeline had a reference letter she had written herself, from a household in Northumberland that she was reasonably certain Mrs. Sedgwick would not trouble to contact. She was in good health. She had no objection to early mornings. She was shown to a room in the servants' wing and given a gray dress and a white apron, and told that her duties would begin the following day. The house itself she had not expected. She had thought it would feel imposing. She had imagined cold stone corridors and the particular silence of rooms that are not used, but Calder Hall was something different. It was large, yes, larger than Dunhollow, but there was a quality to it she had not anticipated. It felt inhabited. The floors were swept. The fires were laid before dawn. The kitchen smelled of bread in the mornings, and something slower and more complicated in the evenings. The other servants moved through it with the ease of people who had been there a long time, and they were not, she found, unkind to her. The first week she saw the Duke of Calder twice, and on neither occasion did he see her. The first time was from the upper landing on a Thursday morning. He was crossing the entrance hall below, already dressed to go out, his coat on and his hat in his hand. He was taller than she had pictured, with a certain quality of stillness about him even when he was moving, as though his body had decided on its direction, and the rest of him was simply waiting to arrive. He did not look up. The second time was through the library door, which was open a few inches when she was passing with a coal scuttle. He was standing at the window with a letter in his hand, reading it with the kind of attention people reserve for things that cost them something. She passed quickly. She did not slow down. She had come for information, not for observation. She reminded herself of this frequently in those early weeks because the house had a quality that made it easy to stop thinking about the reason you were there and simply fall into the rhythm of it. The morning fires, the brass fittings, the long corridors with their dim winter light. She had to make an effort to remember that she was there because her father's signature was at the bottom of a document she had not known existed, and because Thaddeus Voss was living in her house and she did not know what to do about it. She found out things in the gradual, unglamorous way that information comes in servants' halls, which is mostly through overhearing and through the careful interpretation of what is not said. The Duke of Calder was not much liked by the county families, most of whom found him too quiet and too unwilling to be charmed. He was respected, in the heavy way that people respect someone whose goodwill they cannot afford to lose. His estate business was handled by a solicitor in Hexham named Pruitt, who came to Calder Hall on the first Monday of each month and spent the day in the study going over accounts. It was through Mr. Pruitt that she first heard Thaddeus mentioned. She was setting the fire in the anteroom next to the study on a Monday morning when she heard Pruitt's voice through the closed door. Not clearly enough to follow, but she heard the word Dunhollow, and she heard, a moment later, the word Voss. She stayed as long as she reasonably could, occupying herself with the fire, iron, and then with an imaginary problem with the grate, but she could not make out more than individual words, and when Mrs. Sedgwick appeared at the end of the corridor, she picked up the coal scuttle and left. That evening she wrote down what she knew. It was not much. It was not nothing. She had been at Calder Hall for 6 weeks when she was sent to the library to dust the upper shelves. The library was on the first floor, off the main corridor, and it was the kind of room that suggested someone had used it seriously, not as a decoration, but as a place of work. The books were not arranged for appearance. They were arranged, as far as she could tell, by subject and then by size, and several of them had markers in them, pages folded down, or strips of paper tucked between the leaves, the evidence of a reading habit rather than a collecting one. She had been working through the upper shelves for perhaps 20 minutes. When the door opened, she was on the stepladder. There was nowhere to go. "I didn't realize anyone was in here," said the Duke of Calder. "I apologize, Your Grace." She descended 2 steps, not all the way because the cloth was still in her hand, and coming all the way down felt like a declaration of some kind. "Mrs. Sedgwick sent me to do the upper shelves. I can come back another time." "No." He had already moved to the desk. "Continue," she continued. She was aware of him in the way one is aware of weather, not looking directly at it, but knowing precisely where it is. He sat at the desk and opened a ledger and appeared to read it, though whether he was actually reading it she could not have said. She worked her way along the shelf. The room was quiet. Outside it had started to rain. "You're new," he said without looking up. "Yes, Your Grace. I've been here 6 weeks. Where were you before?" She named the household from the reference letter. She had rehearsed this. She gave the name smoothly, without hesitation, and then moved the cloth to the next section of shelf. He did not respond immediately. She thought he had lost interest, or perhaps had not really been interested to begin with, and then he said, "There's no family on the Marsh side in this county, as far as I know." She kept her hand moving. "No, Your Grace, we were from further south." He looked up then. She felt it rather than saw it, the shift in the quality of the silence. She did not turn her head. "Further south," he repeated. "Yorkshire," she said. The word came out evenly. She was proud of that. He went back to the ledger. She finished the shelf and climbed down and gathered the cloth and the small jar of oil she had brought for the bindings. She was nearly at the door when he spoke again. "The books on the bottom shelf," he said, "have not been touched. If you have time tomorrow." "Of course, Your Grace," she said, and left. She stood in the corridor for a moment with the cloth in her hands. Her heart was doing something complicated that she did not examine too closely. The problem with lies, she had learned by then, was not the telling of them. The telling was easy enough, if you had a clear reason and a steady voice and you had rehearsed the details. The problem was the maintenance. A lie required attention. It required that you remember, at every moment, which version of yourself you had presented to which person, and whether those versions were consistent, and that you not say anything that might cause someone to pull on a thread and find that the whole thing unraveled. She managed it. She was careful. She was, she thought, perhaps more careful than she had ever been about anything. But Calder Hall had a rhythm that worked against carefulness, the way a warm room works against staying awake. mornings in the kitchen, where cook, a broad, impatient woman named Mrs. Hartigan, moved between the stove and the table with the certainty of someone who had never questioned their place in the world. Afternoons in whatever room needed her, evenings in the servants' hall, where the footmen played cards and the lady's maid, whose name was Owen, told stories about previous households with the relish of someone who had survived several small wars. She found herself listening. She found herself, occasionally, laughing. She had not laughed in some time, and it felt like a muscle she had not used. She also found herself, on 3 further occasions, in the library. The Duke sent for her, or rather, did not send for her exactly, but on those 3 occasions happened to be in the library when she arrived to continue with the lower shelves, and on each occasion stayed, and on each occasion they spoke briefly and in the careful way of people who are not entirely sure what the conversation is. He asked her once what she thought of a book she had been moving, a volume of natural history with an illustration of a gannet on the cover. She told him, without thinking, that she had always preferred the descriptive passages to the taxonomic ones, because the taxonomy felt like trying to contain something that didn't want to be contained. He looked at her for a moment. "That's a precise view," he said, "for someone dusting shelves." She should have retreated, she said. "Instead, I read a great deal, Your Grace." "So I gather," he said, and went back to his paper. It was the 4th time in the library that she made a mistake. Not a large one, not large enough to undo everything immediately, but large enough. He had asked her, in the course of a longer conversation about the estate's north woodland that she had not intended to have at all, whether she knew the Penwick family. "No," she said, "I don't think I do. They farm on the north border," he said. "Their tenancy agreement has been disputed for the past year. I mention it because their name came up in connection with a solicitor in Alnwick, a Mr. Hartwick." She was very still. "Does the name mean anything to you?" he asked. She looked at him. He was watching her with the careful attention of someone who already suspects the answer to the question they are asking, and who is asking it not to learn the answer, but to see what you do with it. She said, "No." He nodded slowly. He did not say anything else. But something had shifted in the quality of the room, and she knew, with the certain knowledge of someone who has maintained a pretense for long enough to recognize, when it has begun to slip, that she had not been believed. Mrs. Sedgwick found her in the linen room the following morning, and told her, with a neutral expression that communicated a great deal, that the Duke wished to see her in the study. The study was the room she had never been asked to enter. It was a working room, less formal than the library, with papers on the desk and a map of the estate pinned to the wall above the fireplace. The Duke was standing when she came in, and he did not sit down, which meant she did not either, which meant they stood on opposite sides of the desk like 2 people about to negotiate something. "I'd like you to tell me your actual name," he said. There was no point by then in denying it. She could feel it, the way you can feel the moment a door opens and there is no longer any question of whether you are going in. "Emmeline Voss," she said. He did not react to the name immediately. Then something moved across his face, not surprise, she thought, but recognition. The recognition of a person who has already done the research. "Done hollow," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. She held her hands still at her sides. She would not fidget. She had decided, coming down the corridor, that whatever happened in this room she would not fidget and she would not apologize first. "Why are you here?" he said. "My uncle filed a claim on my father's estate," she said, "through a deed that I don't believe my father willingly signed. The witness to that deed is a solicitor named Hartwick. Mr. Pruitt's name appeared in the same context when I overheard a conversation in the anteroom. I wanted to know the connection." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was deciding whether to have her removed from the house. "What made you think there was a connection?" he said. Pruitt is the solicitor for every significant estate in this county, she said, including Dunhollow. My uncle changed solicitors 3 months after my father died. He went to Pruitt, which means Pruitt now handles both Calder Hall's affairs and Dunhollow's affairs, and Hartwick witnessed the deed that transferred Dunhollow to my uncle. I thought. She stopped. You thought, he said not unkindly, that if someone in this house could tell you whether Hartwick and Pruitt had a prior connection, you might have grounds to question the deed's legitimacy. Yes, she said. He turned away from her and looked at the map on the wall. She could see Dunhollow on it, a small mark, unlabeled, 11 miles northeast. She wondered if he had known it was there when the map was made. Hartwick is Pruitt's brother-in-law, he said. The room was very quiet. They have been in business together since 1887, he said. They have witnessed documents for one another on 6 prior occasions. 3 of those occasions involved transfer of property under disputed circumstances. He turned back to her. I have known this for 3 weeks. She stared at him. You've known. Pruitt has been handling certain financial irregularities on behalf of Calder Hall for the past 2 years, he said. I discovered this in September, and I have been building a case since then. Your uncle's deed is connected to that case. Pruitt prepared it. Emmeline felt something loosen in her chest that had been pulled tight for so long she had stopped noticing it. She pressed her hand against the edge of the desk, not for support. She told herself it was not for support, but because the room had gone slightly unsteady. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. When you recognized the name Hartwick, because I didn't know whether you were involved in it, he said, or whether your uncle had sent you. She understood that. She found, respected it. And now? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. The fire in the grate shifted and settled. Pruitt is going to be examined by a solicitor from London in 3 weeks, he said. At that examination, the connection between Hartwick and Pruitt will be documented. The 6 prior transactions will be entered into evidence. The witnesses to your father's deed will be called into question. He paused. It will not be quick, and it will not be without cost. I have 84 pounds, she said. She was not sure why she said it. It came out with a flatness that surprised her. He did not smile exactly, but something in his expression changed. That will not be necessary, he said. She stayed at Calder Hall. It was a practical arrangement. That was what she told herself through November and into December, when the snow came down from the Cheviots and the roads to Hexham were passable only on clear days. Mrs. Sedgwick did not ask her to resume her duties, but she did not ask her to leave either, and she found herself in a middle position in the household that nobody quite named. Not a servant, not a guest, something with no established form. She spent the mornings in the library. This had not been arranged. It simply happened. The Duke worked there most mornings, and she read, and on some days they did not speak at all, and on other days they spoke at length about things that had nothing to do with the legal proceedings and everything to do with books, or the North Woodland, or a particular question about the tenancy agreements that she had an opinion on, which surprised both of them. He was not, she found, severe. He was precise, which people had mistaken for severity. He was careful with words, which people had mistaken for coldness. He was, underneath that precision and that carefulness, something she had not expected and would not have named aloud, because naming it felt like a risk she was not sure she was ready to take. The examination took place in the 3rd week of January. It lasted 4 days. Emmeline was not present. The Duke's London solicitor, a meticulous man named Mr. Voss, had advised against it. But she received daily accounts from the Duke in the evenings, in the study, sitting across the desk from each other with the fire going and their teacups getting cold. Pruitt broke on the 3rd day. This was what Mr. Voss had written in his letter, and the Duke read it aloud to her in a level voice, and when he finished, he set the letter on the desk, and looked at her. "The deed will be invalidated," he said. "There will be proceedings against your uncle. They will likely take until spring." Emmeline looked at the fire. She thought about Dunhollow in spring, the way the light came through the leaking section of the eastern wing and made a pattern on the floor that moved all morning as the sun shifted. She thought about her mother's library. She thought about her father's signature, cramped with gout, on a document he had not understood. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Pruitt defrauded my estate. Your situation was an additional injury, not the cause." "I know," she said. "I'm thanking you anyway." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind was doing something restless against the windows. "There is a question," he said, "of what you intend to do when Dunhollow is returned to you." She had thought about this, in the abstract, in the weeks since the examination began. She had thought about it in the specific way a person thinks about the future when they are not entirely sure they believe in it yet. "Go home," she said. "Put the eastern wing right. Hire someone to sort out the accounts, because they will be a disaster." She paused. "The tenant farm on the north border has been badly managed for at least 3 years." "I should like to speak to the Penwicks. They are good people," he said. "The Penwicks? I thought they might be." The fire had settled into a low, even burn. The room was warm in the particular way of rooms that have been kept warm for a long time, not hurriedly, but through consistent attention. "Dunhollow is 11 miles, he said. "Yes," she said. "That is," he said carefully. "Not very far." She looked at him. He was looking at the fire, but not in the way of someone who was thinking about the fire. "No," she said, "it isn't." He picked up the letter from the desk and set it aside in the neat way he had, and then he looked up at her. And there was something in his face that he was not quite concealing, and she thought, for the first time in a very long time, that the future was something she might actually be able to walk toward. The spring would come. The roads would clear. The eastern wing would be set right, and the library would be recatalogued, and the north woodland would need a new survey. Because the old maps were inaccurate in 3 places she had noticed from the one pinned above the fireplace. There was a great deal of work to do. 11 miles, she thought, was not very far at all.